This is A State of Control, your monthly look at the control and automation segment of the AV industry. My name is Tom Albright. I'm your host. With us is Mr. Richard Fragoza from Fragoza Design. How are you, sir?
Good, good. Soggy West Coast greetings this time right now. We're just got the beginning of a storm coming in, so I would have liked to have said that it was sunny and balmy 70, like you guys had it down at AV Week in LA that had the sunny the 70 and sunny going on. I don't got that. We got rain.
Well, there's different. There's a dividing line in California. There's LA and then everybody else, right? So it's
Or
always
there's
sunny.
us. Yeah, there's us and the rest of the state. We want to secede. One or the other. So.
All right. Also with us from the Sextant Group, Mr. David Barnett. How are you, sir?
Howdy, I'm doing all right.
Excellent.
Chilly here, no rain.
Chilly. But is there snow on the ground still?
Oh yeah, a lot of it.
Yeah.
Like it's been here all week. It's pretty gross.
Last but not, I like snow. I'm a
It's
big
good for like 20 minutes and then it gets old quick.
Well, yeah, especially if you have to shovel it or live it on a daily basis. So, and last but not least, Mr. Steve Greenblatt, Chief Muckety Muck over at Control Concepts. How are you, sir?
Doing great. Great to be on and great to be back.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so here's the thing. Last time we talked, and last time we did a state of control, we talked about the value of well-written code, right? And we got into it, So we only got, I think at least, we only scratched the surface, and I think the other three gentlemen here would agree with that because we thought so much that we're going to do a part two, honestly. So Steve, we're going to kick it off with you here. There are certain, I'm not going to call them standards. There are ways of writing code, right? There are ways of doing this that different schools of thought, right, will adhere to, whether that's the nomenclature or caps versus no caps, this, that, and the other. Take me down though when you're training your programmers, right? When you're training the folks that work in Control Concepts, what do you tell them when you start talking about when you're trying to keep everything together and everything the same? How do you? I guess the best way to ask this is how do you manage that?
Well, I think the idea of trying to get people to conform to a specific way of writing code can be a challenge because everybody has their own way, their own technique, what they're used to, what they're comfortable with. But what is most important is that it needs to be understandable. So although you may not write something exactly the same way as your neighbor, you need to be able to have your neighbor look at what you're doing and understand it, to be able to help you, to be able to hand it off, to be able to collaborate. And I think that's the big point. We try to, of course, instill the idea of documentation, the idea of programming in what I guess would be considered an efficient manner, but not overly optimized, because I think that there's something to be said for writing code that's a little bit more verbose, because the ability to make changes and again to understand it, you need to be able to go back to your code and be comfortable diving into it months later or potentially years later. So those are the things that I think are most important to us is to make sure that it's well written from the concept that it makes sense, it's well structured, it's neat, it's documented. You're not leaving remnants of other projects in your system so that when somebody goes to troubleshoot, they don't start going down some dead end streets, which I'll be honest with you, I've done. I have had to do some things that are real quick, and you start with a project and you try to morph it into this new project. Inevitably, it comes back to bite you. So those are a couple of things that we really hold as guiding principles and standards, I guess, within our organization.
Okay. Rich, you actually both of you have guided me on this. You've got an interesting take where whether it's the guys that work for you directly or sometimes when you have to, you sub it out to other folks, that if you can't look at it, right, if you can't pick up somebody's code and make sense of it, then it's not good, right? Because like Steve said, sometimes you have to go back to it 6 months, a year later, and you have to be able to decipher what you wrote. So what are some of the things that you guys do to put into place that help the handoff, right? So the handoff to me is when one person writes kind of like the base code type, gives it to somebody else. They're actually in the field, turning up the room, making everything work. What are some of the things that you guys do with your organization that helps that handoff happen and a more successful program?
Well, I think in the last podcast it was what David had said is that I started laughing, but it's true, is that you focus on being lazy, right? How do you focus on being lazy? Is you put all the information out there so that you don't have to tax your brain as hard. What we've found is interesting enough, in between the time that we had part 1 of the podcast and part 2 of the podcast, we've been focusing more on some of the new tools, some of the new software development tools that are becoming available. And as it's kind of cool, and I was really looking forward to this podcast because I'm starting to see the first part of the sea change, where the purpose-driven AV type code that everybody had their own secret sauce is starting to move towards true computer science standards, and actual standards. It's like when you got 1 million guys that are coding this, and you got 2 million lines of code, people are actually coming up with rules on how to make some of this stuff work, better or not, but it depends. And what I'm discovering is just that, is that as we start drifting away from the way that it's been, and we're moving towards the way that it is spending more time, actually flexing your computer science chops. This is the right way to structure. This is the right way to name. This is the right way to comment. And additionally, and I don't think we even talked about it the last time, is the use of the software tools that are out there, version control. How do you get it from internally from person 1 to person 2? Well, when you write the piece of code and you check it out and you put it back in, you document what you just did. So during that day's work or that week's work or the on-site work, gets back checked back out, they work on it, they put it back in, and you have a paper trail, for lack of a better term, of how did you do it, why did you do it, what were the challenges that were presented, and being able to pull it either through your version notes or through the commenting in the code itself. And I think right now, the way we've done it for a long time is, and I've always said, is if you can't basically build the user manual out of the comments in your simple program, then you're not doing your job, because your memory is just not going to help you. Not if you're 1,000 projects later, you're just not going to be able to recall that information off the top of your head. If you're a one-person company, yeah, maybe you can, and if you have an infinite capacity to kind of collect the minutia, great. But we're moving towards a more collaborative phase in how our market and our field is maturing. And I think what's happening now is, for us, and it's a lot. It's breaking a lot of bad habits. I've got my own bad habits. I was by myself for a long time, and then as we've grown and I've gone, gee, I have to get what's in my head to somebody else, and I can't just do it by osmosis. I need to actually start following my own rules, and that's what we're finding out, is making use of the tools that are out there. And our software is now getting to the point where we can use the existing tools out there to keep us playing within the rules better.
Okay, so if someone's out there and they don't know what those tools are, right? What are 1 or 2 of them that you guys use or that you know of that helps with version control, that helps with that whole checkout thing and the documentation?
Yeah, you'll hear the acronym SVN, right?
Okay.
So that's it's versioning software, and there's different derivatives that are out there, and depending on how you're putting your code together. But what it basically does is it allows you to take your software and put it into a giant repository and be able to put sections of your code in and out, whether it's your user interface files, whether it's your your actual programming files. We use it for our documentation. We use it for everything. That we put it all in there. It's in a central location, and then as we need a piece, we take it out, we work on it, and then when we're putting it back in, you have to comment it. It's just we don't allow it back in unless you tell us what you've done. And those are, and I mean, if you type in SVN in Google, all of a sudden you're gonna see 20,000 hits that'll pop up. We use a version called Tortoise. Very simple, and very much applies to a lot of the code that people who would be watching this show are doing. And for us, from a collaborative effort, and I mean, we've only been doing it, now heavily vested into it, probably about a year. But we're starting to see the dividends now, because we're not worried about, we grabbed that piece of code and I made the change over here and I forgot to give it back to you, and all of a sudden somebody else starts working on the code, and next thing you know, you've got 2 mismatched versions, and what used to work now doesn't, and now you've got new cool stuff, and then it's just hell, and you start losing money and you start losing confidence, and the client gets upset because it becomes you showed up and you fixed 2 things and you broke 9. That's the common thing that you hear, and we got to grow up as an industry. I mean, that's constantly what I keep looking at, just in terms of our company structure, which is we got to grow up. You've got to become a real software development company. You can't just be cowboys anymore, throwing a couple of pieces of code and saying, hey, look, the TV turned on, we win. It doesn't work anymore. And what's going to happen, especially as the way that the tech is progressing, and we are going to see other outside influences for control, you're not going to be around much longer if you're going to keep doing it the way that you have.
Real quickly, do you use a local version of that, or is it a cloud solution for that, so everybody can touch it whatever they want?
It varies. I mean, you can have, if you're a large enough company, you can have your own hosted server version. Before we did that, we were using Dropbox. As we were feeling it out, we used a very simple version. I mean, everything has its pros and cons. You've got stability, reliability, speed, and cost. And it's kind of what is it? Reliable, simple, cheap. Pick 2 out of 3. So we've spent a whole lot of time going, okay, how is it that we can stage it? And we're still going through growing pains with it. Every once in a while we run across a version, we're like, ooh, we didn't think about that one. But depending, I mean, it depends on the rules. And the beauty of it, again, is how you're built up, and I know some companies do already, is if you've got your portal, and you've got a client-facing portal, and they need their source code because, again, they've bought it and they've contracted it and you've licensed it, they should have the ability to access it. These are all the important things, as our smaller companies kind of move out from being the Wild West and moving into truly being a software development industry.
David, let's bring the consultant in here. From you guys' standpoint, from Sexton or just consultants in general,
mm-hmm.
What mechanisms can you put in place, whether it's in the scope of work or it's in the documentation, that outlines the way in which the programmers document? Right? I mean, are there certain things? What things can you put in those documents when Steve bids on a job, when Rich does, when I do, that says, you know what? Here are the outlines. This is the way I would like to see it done. What sort of things can you put in there?
Honestly, it's really tough. It's a big challenge from the consultant's perspective, because we don't want to impose on Steve or you or anyone how to do your job. We kind of assume that you know what you're doing and are doing it right. So we look at it more as just kind of a more general design methodology. We assume that you're using the industry standard design rules and the tools. We shouldn't, honestly, I don't think we should have to tell you how to document your code properly. That should just be part of what you do. So it's more, I think there's other things that just kind of need to happen, whether it's writing code or doing any other sort of design, where like Rich was just saying, you fix one thing and you break 2 more, or you don't remember what you did 6 months ago, or like Steve said, you're over optimizing the code. So again, there are tools that are quite mature in the computer science, software engineering, development world. Of starting with flowcharts and pseudocode and just documenting and writing, making everything modular. We're entering this kind of age, or this epoch of control systems where, like we said, we're not just controlling VCRs anymore. So things like writing airtight code from the security perspective, I mean, that is critical. And for anything, we're talking about the Internet of Things, we're talking about cloud. As soon as you have all those hooks in there, you also open it up to vulnerabilities. The more sophisticated the control systems get, also the more susceptible they are to attack. So things that we never really, the security in AV has been, put a 4-digit, 1988, which we all are going to smirk at because we all, right? So
yeah, we've all done it.
In case anyone doesn't get that reference, for years.
Yeah, that one still haunts. Yeah, it kind of haunts you.
You go into any AMX touch panel to get into the protected setup mode. The default password was 1988, and I was just at a job site recently, just a couple months ago, and I went in there, and it still worked. This is a system that had been up and running for 14 years, and no one and all that time it was still 1988. So security is a big deal now. The modern control systems they have all the JDIC or whatever it's called, all the mil-spec testing and certification. So the platforms are mature and can support this stuff, but the code has to support it as well. So there's a whole sequence of events that needs to happen on the process side, and a lot of that isn't. Like I said, I'm less concerned with what's under the hood. That to me is means and methods. I tell you what you need to do, and then you're big boys. You can go figure it out. The important thing is that we're in agreement on what the thing is supposed to do, and we don't want it to get to the point where the system's been designed, it's been approved, the racks are built, you're going in there and putting the final touches on the touch panel design, and suddenly you're uncovering that the system doesn't do what the client thought it was going to do, which then has major implications of inputs and outputs and routing and switching and physical changes, in addition to rewriting rewriting software and totally changing the interface. So having all that kind of as part of the design process and having a methodology for approaching that, whether it's wireframes or pseudocode or pilots or sandboxing, again, there's a lot of different techniques, a lot of different tools that come out of the software and design world that I think just need to be applied more to what we're talking about, to the AV control system world.
So let me ask this, and David, I'm going to come back to you first, and then the other two. So is there no value then in standardizing from your perspective or from the end user's perspective? Is there no value then in making sure that these things are documented correctly and written in such a way that's understandable?
Oh, no, there's huge value. There's enormous. I can't overstate the value of that.
The reason I'm asking, is because you said it doesn't matter to you what's under the hood. We're big boys. We know what we're doing. So that's kind of where I'm going with that.
Okay. So let me clarify. What I'm saying is that I'm assuming that everyone's doing that already. The same way when you're going in to buy a new car, it doesn't matter if you're looking at a Hyundai or a Honda or a Mercedes or whatever. You don't have to ask, hey, does this car have seatbelts? Hey, does this car have an airbag? Hey, does this car have cruise control? There are certain things that are just understood that you don't have to ask, hey, is that an option? Oh, do I have to pay more if I want the doors to lock? Certain things are optional and certain things are just expected. And there's that long list of basic features. And everything we're talking about now, I'm considering a basic feature. So maybe I'm a little overly optimistic, but I'm assuming that you're doing all this stuff correctly. I'm not going to tell you which of those 20,000 SVNs to use. I'm not going to tell you to use Dropbox versus your own server versus a cloud storage system versus Google or whatever. That to me is up to you. But you better not come back and say, hey, someone stole my laptop last night and we have to start again, or my hard drive crashed and I lost all the files, or I come back to you 6 months later for a change and the programmer who wrote the code has since moved on or got hit by a bus and now you can't support the project properly. Those things are completely unacceptable. That's what I mean by by them just it's just there. It's just got to be there.
All right, so let's take that same example, right? And pick on Steve and Rich. Rich, what's our seatbelts? You know, what are the standard things from the programming side that we should have in there? I mean, are we still going back to what we've been talking about, which is the nomenclature and all this revision software, or is there more to it that we should have standard?
It's funny is that what Dave was just talking about. He was spot on in terms of kind of means and methods, and it triggered. You know, what is the standard? What's the responsibility? Honestly, as a business owner, right? Let's just take this as, you know, whoever is listening is either, you know, a programmer or a business owner, an independent or part of a larger group. There's three things that you got to focus on first. Number one, the reason for well-built code and properly commented source code is your legal liability. Okay, you've entered into an agreement. You know, somebody is paying you for a service, and if 2 years later, like David said, you know, if programmer A, you know, that worked for you ran off and the code is being held hostage, or this, that, or, you know, how say you've written your service agreement to contract code really, really badly. And, you know, we've had talks about this before, you know, and Troy's been, great. Troy Morgan was great about laying that out. You have a significant amount of legal liability in terms of the services that you provide that you need to make sure that you cover. So first, you need to make sure that your code puts you in a position that if something does go awry, that you're not getting sued, right? Second thing is you've got your professional responsibility. Okay, so just you're standing in the industry, you're standing with the manufacturers that you support, because again, you are, whether you're a dealer or whether you're a services provider, like an ACE or CSP, you have certain standards that you have to maintain with that manufacturer. That if they don't feel that you're supporting that, they're not going to let you use their stuff anymore. Which goes into the third part, which is the company's your profitability, right? As an example, you know, I have said it before, I provide a lifetime warranty on my code. Well, if I half-ass it in the beginning and 3 years later I get a call that something that should have worked didn't, and it points out that, yeah, I wrote bad code, guess who it costs? It costs me. It costs my profitability. So what I thought I made on the job is not what I actually have on the job. You do that enough, you're not going to be in business long enough, because you're going to be spending all of your time fixing all the stuff that you got paid for. So unless you want to operate in not-for-profit status, you know, you're going to have a hard time moving forward. And I think for me, it's, you know, why should you do it? Because you're going to lose money otherwise. It's that simple. And so from the executive management standpoint and from the business owner standpoint, you know, you do it right so that you can actually be here a couple of years down the line to keep doing it. If you don't, things will tend to bite you in the butt, and we've done it. You know, I've done it, and every time, you know, that I've tried thinking that I was going to outsmart the machine and take a shortcut, sure enough, it may not have been that day or even a week, but somewhere down the line, it's bit me right in the ass. And I think that David is exactly on point, which is, as the consultant and handing out these bid packages, whether it's residential or commercial, there are certain assumptions. You know, so what are our seatbelts? Is that first that you should be in business for the right reason, and you should be framing your software so that it will allow you to perpetuate your business. I mean, that's kind of what I view as the giant assume. So it's a long way, you know, it's a long-winded way of saying, you know, just know what you're doing. You know, absolutely. And part of it is having your code positioned and cataloged and stored and commented in a way that you can efficiently and profitably support the project.
Now all of that stuff costs extra money, right? So one of the things that I think that needs to be identified is the value of that to a customer, because we all know that it's important, and as you said, Rich, that's how you stay in business, and that's how we're successful. But how do we compare the fact that we're both getting to the same end result? And although we know what's under the hood and we know what's better, and we've all looked at poorly written code, how does that get communicated to an outsider? I mean, that's I think one of the challenges that we face. I
don't charge my clients for my laptops. You know,
yes, you do.
I don't.
Yes, you
But
do.
I don't.
Don't give me that.
All right. So
No,
yes,
no, no,
much
hold
like
on.
Becky has said, it's
You
my.
charge
Comes
your
at it
clients for
indirectly,
your
I
triple
think.
skinny latte for crying out loud.
Like Rich was saying, if you don't do this right, eventually it's going to come back and bite you. Because if it kind of leaks out that you're not doing what you're expected to do, you're just not going to get hired again by that client, or you're not going to get spec'd in again by that consultant. You're not going to get their referral for the next project, and you're going to get stuck because inevitably there are going to be these little changes, these little modifications. If your code isn't maintainable, in other words, if you're not doing it right, it's not going to be maintainable. It's not going to be flexible. Things are going to break more often. You're not going to be able to accommodate basic, simple requests easily. It's going to end up costing you a lot more time. So, yes, Steve, you're right in that it costs more potentially to do it right up front. But in the long run, my contention is that there's a huge ROI. That if you do it right to begin with, you build up a library. You're not starting from scratch every time, and you're writing modular code. Again, these big software houses and big software development, they've got millions of lines of code. They don't start from a blank piece of paper every time. They've got routines, and they only write new, the stuff that's really unique to that application, and everything else they just drag in from the library. And there's this, our stuff should really be no different than that in terms of the approach. And that's an efficient approach. Again, going back to the laziness thing. Do it once, do it right. And that's ultimately going to save you as the programmer, or you as the business owner. That's going to ultimately, profit.
All right, let me take an unpopular angle at this, right? Let me clarify, I guess, or full disclosure. Mr. Fregosa is an independent programmer. Steve is an independent programmer. His company is. I am, and I run a company called Innovet. We're independent programmers. So this is not going to be popular with our fellow independent programmer brethren. However, the question I think needs to be asked: how do we police bad programmers that give us all black eyes, right? That give us all bad names? Because David's right, and all you guys are right, that you have to be maintainable. However, there are people out there, and we all know who they are. In your geographic area or in the AV industry in general, we know who these people are, who have taken a class or think they know what they're doing. And in the integration world, they refer to them as trunk slammers, and I'm not sure what the programming equivalent of that is. But these are folks who probably don't have a certification, or if they do, it's 20 years old, and are getting hired on one-offs, or getting hired by this consultant, and he realizes that it's a crap programmer, so they're not hired again, and so they go on to the next consultant, and she figures out that he's a bad programmer, so she doesn't hire him again. It goes on and on and on and on and on. So, Mr. Greenblatt, we'll kick this off with you. Give you the easy question. How do we police this? I mean, how do we keep our fellow programmer, how do we keep our good name, I guess, is the best way to ask this.
I think the problem starts, and I don't have a good answer because I wish I did, because this has been an ongoing problem, and I think that we have to defeat the bad experiences that people have had over time every day. I mean, that's I think one of the biggest things that we fight against. I was just meeting with a consultant earlier today, and they were talking about the bad experience that their client has had with programming, and it just goes on, and we just we fight against that, and people just have these preconceived notions, and many of them are valid. But I think it starts with the process of writing the programming and writing code, and I think that's a lot of what we've been alluding to. If a programmer is showing up at a job site and opens his laptop and is starting the project in front of you, you know you're off to a bad start. And I think that's one of the big red flags. And you know what? I have customers that we still work with. I have that just don't trust that you're working on their project unless they see you working on it, or they'll have you come out to the site early because they don't have the confidence, and even though they know you, that you're going to be prepared. So I feel like that's the fact that we have to convince our customers, partners, whomever they are, that the work done by a professional programmer is done in their office, and maybe one of the things that we do is we give them a preview. Maybe we load in code remotely just to show them that, look, our job is ready. Our stuff is working. The problem is knowing whether it's going to work also depends on other factors. But I think that's the one thing I could talk to, is the fact that it is a process to write code that is done well, and I think it's not just something that you can do on the fly or overnight.
Okay.
So I want to jump in if I can,
yeah.
just real quick. So I think, like this is one of the reasons, honestly, why I wanted to make sure I participated in this topic, because it is critical, and part of it is, a big part of it is education, getting the word out. And if the clients understand the difference, then they're going to ask for it. The same way, like, no one would buy a car these days that didn't have seat belts that are, inspected, or that have, they wouldn't buy a car that hasn't been crash tested. And you see now, even in car advertisements, it's 5-star safety tests and all that. So there is an awareness that didn't exist in the 60s, when cars didn't even have seatbelts at all. So that's a big part of it. The other big part of it is just to start to define some of these principles, which to us on this level are kind of common sense, but to kind of start to make them more as either standards or best practices. And so if I can just for a second plug an effort that some of us are actually involved in right now, we're updating the dashboard for AV controls, which is kind of the closest thing that we have in the industry right now. And we're taking it kind of to the next level, to modern control systems, and just talking about some of these basic principles. I just started reading a book called The Design of Everyday Things, which maybe many people have read, by Don Norman. It's a very famous book. And again, he's just talking about just basic things like what should a door look like, to make sure that you know whether to pull or push, and if you're pushing on the left side or the right side, just basic things like that. And try to codify some of that, try to define some of that, and try to get some buy-in. And then we've got a document that we can reference. Getting back to your previous question, then I can put that in my spec. Must adhere to these standards or these best practices, and then the values there. Then the clients know, and then anyone who's not doing that is going to quickly get ostracized.
Okay, so back to the document, and David's on the committee, and Mr. Greenblatt, drafted me onto this as well. And I'd say it's been an interesting discussion, and actually, what wouldn't be a bad idea, Steve, is to see if you can get all these guys and gals on this program, because that would be a neat discussion. But David's right? This is another document that we're trying to put out there that help people like David and other consultants to keep us honest. Let's be honest about it. Keep us honest. But Rich, what are some of the things that taking David's lead on this that we can do to make sure that David knows some of the not good programmers, to make sure that they don't get on the list? Or my main clients honestly are integrators, and so if, let's say that David's doing a project here in St. Louis, and one of my integration clients calls me up and says, "Hey, can you do this for me?" And David sees my name on the list, and he's like, "Heck no, I don't want that dude doing my stuff." How do we do that? How do we disseminate this information?
Just narc on everyone.
Lovely.
Just drop time.
Let's start a website. Let's start a website. Bad programmers.
Programming narcs, exactly. Forget snitches get stitches. No, we're not going that way. We're going the other way. Call them out on social media, Facebook it, public shaming. It's kind of like the dog shaming signs, right?
Yes.
We're just gonna, it's gonna be like the programming shaming. It's like I'm gonna haul out my programmers. It's like, I forgot to comment in or,
I forgot.
They're
a carriage return.
I would love to say that we've got a magic answer, and we don't. And you're dealing with, the law of averages, right? So, let's extrapolate this to somebody who makes a web page, right? You can hire a web designer, and you can go to Joe's Web Design for $9.99 an hour, or you can go to a graphic, a web developer, right? There's always going to be the people who feel that they can afford to be optimistic, right? And they're going to hedge their bet, and there's always going to be people who are looking to be opportunistic about it and jump on that. And whether their professional moral barometer allows them to go that way or not, I mean, there is something called ethics, and not every company is going to have that, and that's just a reality of things. You just hope that through education and through educating tech managers through places like Tech Talk or and working with tech. I know a couple of guys who are trying to do this. I keep going back to, if anybody's listening specifically to this section, is, how are you going to stay in business? How are you going to differentiate yourself? What is going to allow you to take the next step, as opposed to looking and saying, yeah, all these other guys are trunk slammers, or they're fly-by-night operations, and how can I afford to compete? Well, find a way or get out. It's that simple. Find a way or get out. And it's kind of harsh, but that's the way that the market's going, is that you are either going to provide a value-added service, or you're going to chuck your ethics out the window and away you go, and I'm off to the next, and you're changing your website. It's like, I'm Joe's programming service. No, today I'm Jim's programming service. That's always going to be out there. To say that it isn't out there, it's just ridiculous. So
I think that customers are also becoming more savvy. Clients and users. These tech managers that you're alluding to. I mean, they've all been burned at this point, and they kind of know what to look for. They know what questions to ask, and they don't. They're not willing to accept, and they don't necessarily want to pay extra for it. They're just, again, they're operating the same way that I am. They're just assuming that that's the baseline, and the reality is that things are competitive enough that they can demand it and get away with it. Not every project is necessarily going to be able to afford, the level of service that we're talking about here, but that's true for AV in general. I mean, it's true for anything in general. They're not necessarily going to afford my design fee either. They're going to go down to, well, I was going to say Radio Shack, but that's...
Oh, come on. Come on.
He was waiting all episode for that.
Where is the AV world going to go when they need that one last piece to make a system work?
When I need a decent soldering iron, are you kidding me? Go ahead, David.
So it's the difference between going out and buying a $180, professional level soldering iron, or running down the block and getting a $15 one from Radio Shack. There's a place for them, but I think the level that we're talking about using real professional tools, and the same goes for hardware and soldering. Goes for the software development as well.
Yeah. Do you know how much Mark Lavecchia cost me in episode 1 by revealing my save as charges? My magical ability to double charge for save as. No, it's absolutely that. It's that the industry, whether it wants to or not, is maturing. It has to. There are going to be too many outside influences, and David exactly said it, is that people have been burned enough now. We've got 20 plus odd years under our belts now of these systems being deployed. So there is now a history to work with, and people will now encounter it, and it's not the gee whiz stuff anymore when they walk in and they see a touch panel. You walked into an executive boardroom in 1992, 1993. It was like, ooh, look at this. It's automated. Now it's like, why isn't it? And so our clients are maturing in terms of their expectations, and so they're going to be able to spot it a lot faster as well. But again, it's and I feel like I'm pleading to the business owners out there. It's like, man, if you want to survive, if you want to be able to have longevity in the industry, that's coming back full circle to this. That's why you got to do it right. It's a cost of doing business. It's the same thing like paying your electricity to keep your laptops on, and cubicles, and and your copy machines, and all the other stuff. It should be part of your operating expense. And if you're not looking at it that way, why aren't you? Because chances are you probably really don't know where the money is coming in and out of your business.
Yeah. All right. As we kind of wrap this up, guys, let's take this to the customer level, right? Most of us, touch the customer on some level directly, the actual end user. David obviously works for them as he's designing.
I don't know if I'd use the phrase "I touch my
customers.
customers."
You know what? It's Friday. I'm tired. I've already done one podcast today. I'm on a plane to Amsterdam in 2 days. Leave me alone, Fregosa. Good night.
Tim's checking. Is this a good touch? Are you comfortable? Or is this a good touch? May I proceed?
Oh my!
No more Friday afternoon
No
podcasts.
kidding. 50 Shades of Grey comes out in 2 weeks. Our safe word with our clients. Where the heck was I going with this? I have no clue. Oh, how do we convince clients that this is worth it? Right? David specs a system. Fregosa and I and Steve all kind of get them, and we put together our proposals. We put together our quotes. We say it's going to cost, I don't know, $2 million. I pull it out of the air, and the client looks at that and goes, "Well, that's a lot of money. Why is it $2 million?" Some of that is our experience. Some of that is the fact that we do have processes and we do have mechanisms in place that provide valuable code. So, Steve, how do we convince clients that maybe it's not $2 million, but the fact that a good qualified programmer is worth their weight in gold, and you're not going to have any problems. How do we communicate that?
It's a couple of answers I could give you for that. One, I think David hit the nail on the head earlier when he was saying that the technology managers are becoming a lot more savvy, a lot more demanding, a lot more knowledgeable. They do what we do, many of them. So they're going to get their source code and they're going to open it, and then they're going to that's going to be the final factor right there. So I mean, we're no longer going to be able to hide out in the source code and give them something that they are just going to put on a disk or a hard drive or whatever it might be and forget about it or give it to the next guy. Many of them need to be able to know what's inside so that they can swap out a device, make small changes or whatever. So we already I think that's one of the deciding factors. The other one is that we've been fighting this battle for a long time. I think those that last and those that are doing good work are going to continue to, and it comes down to you get what you pay for, unfortunately. I guess business will end up weeding out the bad people. Unfortunately, I hate to see people have those bad experiences and have to learn from their mistakes.
All right.
One thing that I find encouraging, we've talked a lot over the last decade or two about this AV-IT integration. One of the positive outcomes of this is that more and more of our clients, your clients are IT folk, and they're used to dealing with things in a very kind of different way than traditional AV. So they're used to having an SLA. They're used to having uptime requirements. With monetary repercussions if something breaks and goes down. And they're also used to so they're used to more mission critical applications, and they kind of put AV and AV control systems in that basket. So in a way it's nice, it's elevated, but it also definitely puts the pressure on us to deliver. But they're also dealing with large scale integration of various different communication systems and networks on a very high level, with databases, cloud, and physical interfaces and storage systems. They're doing so much that what we're doing in comparison is often almost trivial, and the fact that we can't get our stuff together enough to do it properly, it just doesn't fly with those people, and they're just going to move on to the next. So that's where I see things kind of heading more and more in that direction.
Okay. All right, Mr. Fregosa, you have the last word on this one. How do we sell this to the clients? How do we sell our value?
I mean, it's again, it's it's being able to differentiate yourself. It's being able to tell your story. It's being able to show why. Again, it's like everything else. Is that it's good business sense. What gets you the sale, what doesn't get you the sale. The ability to be professional. The ability to answer the question before it's asked. The ability to ask the question that they don't know to ask. And again, resi and commercial are different. Commercial, again, David, well, there'll be a spec coming from a consultant, and so you're working within the spec, and so your job is to prove why you're the best one for the job. And if you're coming in at potentially a bit of a surcharge above where everybody else is, well, why? Explain why. Can they? Because again, it's if you're dealing with a decision maker, or if somebody is reporting to a decision maker, learn to build your tools to allow people to champion you. I mean, and again, now we're getting away from like source code. Now we're getting into relationship sales and how to market your business and to grow your programming business. And that's a completely separate conversation at that point. But I mean, writing good code is only part of the equation. Knowing how to sell that you write good code is the other part of the equation. Yeah. And that comes from that is that you have pride in your craftsmanship, number one, but also know that you have to be able to sell that craftsmanship. People buy a Piaget watch for a reason. There's a pride in ownership. We kind of take that approach with residential. Is that you're bringing us in because you're looking for a lifestyle experience. You're looking for a digital concierge. You're looking for somebody to facilitate. You're looking for somebody, like I said, to ask you the questions you don't know to ask, or to ask you the questions in a way for you to be educated to make a decision. And that's a service. That's a value-added service, as opposed to, hey, do you want a red button or a green button? That has no value necessarily inherently. So like I said, I mean, that could be a completely different show altogether, which is how to market your programming services.
Yeah. All right. We will leave it there. Thank you guys so much, Mr. David Barnett from the Sexton Group. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
How can people get a hold of you or the Sexton Group?
You can hit us at our website. It's just www.thesextongroup.com. Phone number, emails, and stuff are there.
Okay, very good. Rich Fregosa, fregosadesign.com. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Also on the Twitter and on the Facebooks and all the other places on the interwebs. Thanks for having me.
R. Fregosa. Last but not least, Steve Greenblatt from Control Concepts. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. You could reach me at controlconcepts.net is our company website. Twitter is at Steve Greenblatt, and as Rich so graciously alluded to, Mark Levecki and I are doing formed technology managers community, and for those interested, you can check it out at techtalkav.com.
Yep, and they do a very, very nice podcast as well. Don't follow me, but go by the website if you would, please. avnation.tv, avnation.tv. You'll find this program and a host of others. Our most recent AV Crosstalk was very, very interesting. I have a special interview one-on-one with Kirsten Nelson. She's the outgoing editor at SCN, but she's the new editor at large. Is her new title. She's still with Nube, and since she's doing some really cool, neat things in AV, so check that out. I have a new technology wrap, of course, AV Week, our weekly podcast. As you're listening to this, most likely we will be on our way to Amsterdam to cover ISE 2015, so check that out as well. So avnation.tv, avnation.tv. Thanks so much for listening. Thanks so much for watching. This has been A State of Control.